Imagine a world that you wouldn't even recognize. A planet that wasn't blue and white, but smothered in a thick, toxic smog of carbon dioxide and methane. Picture oceans not of cool, clear water, but of a boiling, acidic sludge stretching out to the horizon. The ground beneath you isn't solid earth, but a cracked, blistering crust, constantly ripped open by volcanoes bleeding molten rock. The sky is a weird, bruised orange, and the sun is just a dim, distant ghost. This isn't some alien planet in a faraway galaxy. This was our home. This was planet Earth 4 billion years ago. It was an almost unimaginably violent place, a Hadean underworld of fire and poison. And yet somewhere in this planetary furnace, in the most hostile environment you can think of, the greatest mystery of all time was about to begin. How did this hellscape, a planet that seemed bent on its own destruction, become the cradle of life? How, out of this chaotic inferno of rock and gas, did that first delicate spark of biology even happen? The story of our planet's birth isn't a gentle a story of chaos and disaster. It's the story of how, in an environment of pure violence, life didn't just show up, but it fought, it survived, and it ultimately conquered the entire planet. This is the story of our planet's secret history, a history written in fire, stone, and the first faint whisper of life. The cauldron of creation. Our story kicks off in the aftermath of cosmic violence around 4.5 billion years ago. The early solar system was basically a shooting gallery, a messy disk of dust. Gas and rock left over from the sun's birth. Through a process called accretion, gravity started pulling all this stuff together. Clumps became rocks. Rocks became baby planets. And these planetesimals smashed into each other in a chaotic gravitational mosh pit that went on for millions of years. Earth was born from this frenzy, not as a calm blue marble, but as a glowing, molten ball of magma. Its surface temperature was over 200 degrees Celsius, a fiery environment where solid ground just couldn't last. In these early days, our planet was a bruised and battered infant. It was constantly getting hammered by meteorites and asteroids during a period called the Late Heavy Bombardment. And these weren't small impacts. They were planet-scale disasters, some big enough to boil away any oceans that tried to form and melt the crust all over again. The biggest of these impacts involved a Mars-sized object we've named Vea. In a glancing but world-shattering blow, Dia slammed into the young Earth. The crash was so huge it blasted a colossal amount of debris into orbit. This ring of vaporized rock and dust, held by Earth's gravity, eventually came together to form our constant companion in the sky, the Moon. The collision also knocked Earth on its axis, giving us our seasons, left our world a seething, glowing hot ball of magma. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth was just a hot ember in the darkness of space. Its first atmosphere, made of light gases like hydrogen and helium from the early solar system, was quickly stripped away by the solar wind and the planet's own intense heat. What replaced it was a toxic soup coughed up from the planet's own insides. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, spewing out a thick, heavy atmosphere of water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane, and ammonia. But one crucial element was fatally missing: free oxygen. The air was unbreathable, a suffocating blanket that trapped heat and made the planet's climate a living hell. Yet, in all this desolation, a key ingredient for life was showing up. Icy comets and asteroids, leftovers from the outer solar system, rained down, delivering huge amounts of water. As the planet finally, slowly began to cool over millions of years, the water vapor in that thick, volcanic atmosphere started to condense. At first, it must have been a rain that sizzled and evaporated, the second it touched the hot crust. But slowly, relentlessly, the rain kept falling. It fell for centuries, maybe even millennia, a worldwide downpour that started to fill the huge, cratered basins of the young planet. The first oceans were born, but these weren't the oceans we know. They were hot, probably close to boiling, and acidic from all the carbon dioxide dissolved in them. Under a faint young sun that was only about 70% as bright as it is today, these dark, churning waters covered a world that was still getting pummeled from space. The Hadean was named after the Greek underworld for a good reason. It was a planet of fire and shadows, of boiling seas and a poisoned sky. By all accounts, this world was sterile. It was a geological monster, a place where the chemistry of life just seemed impossible. The stage was set not for life, but for endless emptiness. The problem was huge. In a world so hostile to existence, how could life possibly get a foothold? The forbidden spark. To get life started, you need more than just water. You need building blocks. You need complex organic molecules like amino acids and nucleotides, the basic parts of proteins and DNA. But on a planet of bare rock and toxic gas, where could these complicated molecules have come from? This is the puzzle of abiogenesis. How life comes from non-living stuff. For centuries, this was more of a philosophical question than a scientific one. But as we learned more about early Earth, our theories about this forbidden spark got better. One of the most famous ideas is the primordial soup. This concept pictures the early oceans as a giant warm pond full of chemicals. Energy, either from powerful lightning strikes flashing through the dense air or intense ultraviolet radiation from the young sun, would have zapped the simple molecules like methane, ammonia, and water. This energy could have broken them apart and let them recombine into more complex organic structures. In 1953, the Miller-Urey experiment famously tested this. Scientists mimicked the conditions of early Earth in a set of glass flasks and tubes, hitting a mix of these gases with electrical sparks. After just a week, they found that several types of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, had formed all by themselves. It was a groundbreaking discovery. It proved the basic parts of life could arise naturally from the raw materials on primitive Earth. But the primordial soup theory has its problems. Some scientists think the early atmosphere might not have had as much methane and ammonia as the Miller-Urey experiment used. Plus, the oceans were so huge that these new molecules might have been diluted so much they'd rarely bump into each other. This led scientists to look for a different kind of cradle for life, one with more concentrated ingredients and a steady energy source. They found it in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean. Imagine a place of total darkness, miles below the surface of the boiling sea. Here the Earth's crust is thin, and seawater seeps into cracks, getting superheated by magma. This water, now loaded with minerals and chemicals, erupts back out of the seafloor through towering chimneys called hydrothermal vents. These black smokers spew a dark plume of superheated mineral-rich fluid into the cold ocean. Today, these vents are swarming with life-weird ecosystems of bacteria and tubeworms that thrive in complete darkness, powered by chemical energy, not sunlight. This led to the hydrothermal vent hypothesis, a strong alternative for where life started. These vents had everything GI needed. The chemical plumes were a concentrated soup of building blocks. The vents themselves, with their complex mineral surfaces, offered tiny compartments where chemicals could collect and react. And crucially, they provided a constant energy source from the sharp difference in chemistry and temperature between the hot vent water and the cold ocean around it. This energy could have powered the reactions needed to link simple molecules into the long chains essential for life, like proteins and nucleic acids. For many scientists, these dark, deep-sea cauldrons, safe from the harsh UV radiation and meteorites at the surface, are the most likely place where life first sparked. But making the building blocks is just the first step. The real jump from chemistry to biology is replication. A pile of amino acids isn't alive. Life needs a way to pass on its information, to make copies of itself. This is the ultimate chicken and the egg problem. DNA holds the blueprint, but it needs proteins to copy it. Proteins do all the work, but they need DNA's instructions. So which came first? The answer might be neither. Enter the RNA World Hypothesis. RNA is a molecule, a bit like DNA. In our cells today, its main job is to be a messenger, carrying instructions from DNA to our protein-building factories. But scientists have found that RNA is a multi-talented molecule. It can store genetic info like DNA, and it can act as an enzyme to drive chemical reactions, just like a protein. This double-threat ability makes it the perfect candidate for the first self-replicating molecule. In an RNA world, early life was all about RNA. These molecules could both store the instructions for making themselves and actually make it happen. It was a simple, elegant solution to the chicken and egg problem. Over millions of years, this system would have gotten more complex, eventually wrapping itself in a protective bubble of fatty molecules, forming the first simple cell. Later on, evolution would hand over the data storage job to the more stable DNA molecule and the workhorse role to more versatile proteins. Leaving RNA as the vital middleman it is today, the spark was lit. The first titans and the great poisoning. The first life on Earth wasn't something you could see. It wasn't an animal or a plant. The first living things were microbes, tiny single-celled organisms called prokaryotes. They were simple, far simpler than today's bacterial, probably just a strand of genetic material inside a fatty membrane. These were the true titans of early Earth, the pioneers of a whole new thing called biology. They were anaerobic, meaning they didn't need oxygen. In fact, oxygen would have been a deadly poison to them. They thrived in the oxygen-free world, getting energy from chemical reactions in the soupy oceans or the mineral-rich waters of hydrothermal vents. For hundreds of millions of years, these tiny, invisible organisms were the only things living on our planet. They were life. But the world they lived in was still a hostile, alien place. That was about to change, all because of a revolutionary new trick developed by one group of these microbes. Around 3.5 billion years ago, a new type of bacteria evolved, Cyanobacteria. These tiny organisms invented something that would completely re-engineer the planet: photosynthesis. By harnessing the energy from the dim young sun, they figured out how to split water molecules and use carbon dioxide to make their own food. This was a huge success, and cyanobacteria spread across the shallow seas of the globe. We can still see signs of their ancient kingdom today in the form of stromatolite sludge, layered boulders built by mats of these microbes over countless generations. These ancient fossils, some dating back 3.5 billion years, are the earliest large-scale evidence of life on Earth. Photosynthesis gave cyanobacteria a huge advantage. It had a side effect. It produced a waste product. For every bit of carbon dioxide they ate, they released a molecule of something new, something the planet had never really seen before: free oxygen. For the first billion years or so, this oxygen didn't just float up into the atmosphere. Instead, it was immediately soaked up by iron, dissolved in the oceans. As the oxygen reacted with the iron, it basically made the oceans rust. The iron oxide fell to the seafloor, and over hundreds of millions of years, this process created the huge iron ore deposits we mine today. The planet was literally rusting. The oceans, which might have been a murky green, slowly started to clear as the iron was stripped out. But around 2.4 billion years ago, the iron in the oceans was all used up. There was nothing left to absorb the oxygen being pumped out by the relentless cyanobacteria. So, for the first time, oxygen started to escape the oceans and build up in the atmosphere. This is called the Great Oxidation Event. It was maybe the biggest turning point in the history of life and, also, its first great disaster. To the anaerobic life that had ruled the planet for over 1 billion years, this flood of oxygen was a toxic apocalypse. Oxygen is highly reactive. It tears organic tissues apart. These early microbes. The changing atmosphere was a deadly poison, triggering the planet's first, and possibly biggest, mass extinction. Life was almost wiped out by its own success, but life finds a way. Facing this crisis, some organisms adapted. Some retreated into oxygen-free zones like deep sea mud, where their relatives still live today. But others evolved new ways to not only survive oxygen, but to use its incredible chemical power. This new trick, called aerobic respiration, was way more efficient at getting energy from food. The very poison that caused a mass extinction became the fuel for a new, more complex and more powerful form of life.
Ow.
The rising oxygen had another huge effect. High up in the atmosphere, sunlight zapped oxygen molecules, causing them to reform as ozone or O3. Over time, this created the ozone layer, a protective shield around the planet that absorbs the most harmful UV radiation. For the first time, the surface of the Earth became a safe place to live, no longer sterilized by the sun's rays. The stage was now set for the next great chapter in life's story: the evolution of larger, more complex eukaryotic cells, the ancestors of all plants, fungi, and animals, including us. The world had been transformed from a toxic, fiery ball into a living, breathing planet. All thanks to the collective work of trillions upon trillions of tiny organisms over billions of years. The journey from a molten rock to a living world is a story on a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's a story we're still uncovering, with new discoveries constantly changing what we know about where we came from. If this trip into our planet's deepest past has you hooked, think about subscribing and joining us as we keep exploring the biggest questions about our universe, our planet, and ourselves. Every rock, every fossil, and every living cell holds a piece of this ancient history, a story for billion years in the making. Conclusion: from the fiery chaos of the Hadean Aeon, a planet was born. From a chemical soup in a boiling acidic ocean, the first spark of life was lit. From microscopic organisms fighting a planetary-scale war with a poison of their own creation, a new world was forged. What a raid. But its legacy is everywhere. It's in the iron in our blood, a throwback to those rusted oceans. It's in the oxygen we take with every breath, a gift from ancient bacteria. And it's in the very DNA that makes us who we are, a genetic echo of a single common ancestor that survived against all odds. The journey from there to here was never guaranteed. It was a story of chance, of disaster, and of incredible resilience. Looking back at that unrecognizable, violent world, it seems like a miracle that anything survived at all. But it did. Life took hold in the most inhospitable place imaginable, and then remade the planet in its own image. That's the most mind-blowing revelation of our secret history. Earth isn't just a planet that happens to have life. It's a planet that has been built, shaped, and utterly transformed by life itself. We aren't just living on Earth. We're a living part of it. The current chapter in an epic story that began in fire and water 4 billion years ago.